Okay, I'm here with Jeff. He's one of the founding producers of Shenandoah Studios. Welcome, Jeff, and thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
What does the founding producer of Shenandoah Studios do?
So a producer does a little bit of everything. Um, Ultimately, he's the one responsible for delivering the product on time. So a lot of it is project management, allocating, deciding where people are going to work, deciding what's going to be done in what order. Um, some of it is play testing and game design work, although we use outside designers, and so it's not that I didn't design any games from the ground up here. And I also work on what I'd call ancillary material, that a lot of the things other than the game itself that make up the package. So tutorial, manuals, the history sections we ship with. I either write all of that or I edit stuff we get from freelancers.
Cool. Um, what kind of games have you worked on with Shenandoah Studios?
I've been involved in both of our releases so far. Um, I was co-producer on Battle of the Bulge and Drive on Moscow, and I'm currently working on Desert Fox, which is our forthcoming Crisis in Command title.
What kind of challenge do you developing Battle of the Bulge and Drive on Moscow? What kind of challenges did you face as a founding producer?
I'd say the biggest challenge is knowing when to stop, um, because I believe you already talked to David, one of our developers. He likes to say, in software, all things are possible. So there's always this urge to keep adding. There's always one more cool feature or one more really good user interface cleanup. And at a certain point, you have to say enough is enough. And yes, and it's hard because you really could make the game better, but at a certain point you have to say we could always spend more time and make it even better, but we have to get this out.
How did you come to work for Shenandoah Studios? I mean, where did this all begin?
Okay, this one's a long story. I originally met Eric through one of his exchange students at the National University of Singapore entrepreneurship program here. And so he found out that I was designing board games, which I do in my spare time, and he offered to take a look at one of mine and really liked what he saw. So originally we were working to try to get that one, which is a submarine game called War Patrol, taken on by a publisher. And then that was late 2009, as best I recall. And then shortly after the iPad came out, and Eric got the idea for Shenandoah Studio, and he decided to bring me on.
Oh wow.
Yeah.
As a founding producer, I mean, you're controlling basically every a lot of the aspects of the game development. What kind of like input do you have developing a game? If you have any examples, like with Battle of the Bulge, what kind of input did you have in terms of design of the game?
Well, so for Battle of the Bulge, I helped lay out the basic interface. Worked along with John Butterfield, who is a very talented UI designer when he's not designing really good war games. Um, I would say I had some input into the design, just because by the end of it, I think I played a lot more games than John had because I had the computer version and he didn't. So I would say I had some input, but the final say was usually his.
What do you love about your job? What gets you to get up and come and do your job every day?
The fact that I get paid to play games. Besides that, I'm getting paid. I'm getting paid to work on cool games. I'm part of an absolutely amazing team. That's easily the best group that I've worked with anywhere. I love my job.
Coming from board games, is developing a board game and developing a game for the iPad, how different is that, and what kind of challenges did you face kind of adapting to that role?
Well, there are the obvious technical aspects. I think that I handled that pretty well just because we have good developers and I believe them. I trust them. And so if they give me an estimate of how long something's going to take, I'll use that, and that's good enough for project planning. What's less obvious is that there are some things that are easy to do in a board game that are a lot harder to do with a computer game. Mm-hmm. Good example is when we originally were designing bowls, we wanted to do a random setup where instead of always getting the same configuration of attacking Axis forces, they'd be sort of in the same general area but split up. And without getting too involved in a lecture, it developed that we could do that, or we could create a technical system that would allow us to quickly put together new scenarios and have them easily be tested, but not both.
If I was a brand new person and I'm just going into college and I know what I want to be a producer for a game. I want to do your job. What advice would you have for me? What kind of roadmap should I be looking at to be sitting in your seat?
Well, okay, the thing with the Chinese exchange student was pretty unlikely, so I wouldn't count on that. Seriously, I would say just get involved in there are, especially if you're in college, there are a lot of people out there doing board games, doing indie video games. Get involved in it. If programming is what you love and you're good at, then study that. You don't have to. I was a biology major. But there's not a lot to project management other than just experience and learning by doing.
On the job.
Yeah. So I would say if you want to do this, you love games. You probably have an idea for your own game. Do it. Doesn't matter if it's a computer game, if it's a board game, card game, whatever. Put it together, give it to some people, see what they think. And just think critically about the games you play. Don't just say, I liked it or I didn't like it. Think about why you liked or didn't like a particular title. Because that's all information that you bring to the table when you're trying to put together your own game. So, I wish I had more of a concrete roadmap, but I don't.
just playing give feedback?
Just learn, not necessarily in class.
Cool. Awesome. Thanks, Jeff. So I'm here with David. He's development manager of Shenandoah Studios. Welcome, David. Thanks for coming on the show.
Thanks.
What does development manager do of within Shenandoah Studios?
So we have a team of, I guess with our co-op students, we have 6 developers, and I'm sort of the lead of that, responsible for hiring most of them, setting our standards, making sure that things work.
Right. As a development manager, do you also have input into the game? Do you oversee that?
Well, one of the advantages of working at a small studio is I do get to do a lot of development as well. And at Shenandoah, everyone has some input into the game. We get pretty much finished designs from people like Ted Reeser or John Butterfield. We turn them into actual software, but there's always something that needs a little bit of tuning once you start playing it. The whole company can contribute to that.
As a development manager, like when you're hiring somebody, what kind of what do you look for in a candidate?
Well, one of the it's maybe cheating, but one of the things I like to do is find someone who's done a game before, and that's really not as hard as it sounds. Basically means, have you done anything that you have finished?
So they would have to have previous development experience.
Some kind of development experience. We're looking for people who can code the same kind of things we've been doing, which have been in Objective-C so far. But you don't have to have a game in the App Store. Just something that you can say, I did this, and class projects will work for that. But just being a wannabe is, you got to start somewhere, but anything really. There's so many tools out there, you can do your own game. So just go do it.
How did you start? How did you wind up at Shenandoah Studios? What's the roadmap that you had?
I was in Seattle at the time, and sort of on a whim, I just did a quick search for something to get back into the game business, and Shenandoah's ad about being development manager for iPad games was sort of like, those are 3 things that are, wrap that together, and that's kind of my perfect job.
Wow. So
it was certainly worth checking them out and checking out Philadelphia and eventually moving here.
You said you were previously into games. What kind of background do you have?
So the first game I created was called, it has several names, but it was a game on Newton originally that Apple kind of wanted a game for their platform, but then decided halfway through that they're not going to do games, they're a serious company. And after that, I did a game called King of Dragon Pass, which was a project where I assembled a team and was a producer and designer and developer on that one. And that basically landed me a job at Gamehouse doing their downloadable casual games. And I eventually moved up and was development manager there.
Wow. So what's your 9-to-5 job look like at Shenandoah Studios? You punch in at 9?
I wouldn't say we punch in exactly, but we're a little bit flexible on hours. But I actually do usually happen to show up about 9. I happen to be the point person on our bug database, which is also used for customer support. So I guess I'll usually take a quick look and see if any major issues have come in, that we have bugs we didn't know about, or questions I can answer for our players. We have our Scrum meeting around 10, so since I'm in projects, I'm part of that. That's where we review our progress for the last 24 hours, see if everyone's on schedule, if anyone's being blocked. Helps people coordinate because you know what you're doing and what other people are doing. And much of the day is just writing games.
Wow. So it must. How challenging is it to be a development manager? What kind of challenges do you face with that position?
In some ways, our biggest challenge was finding the right people. Since I have, I think, found the right people, it makes things a lot easier. We have a really good team here, and it's not like they need a lot of help getting stuff done. I can let them just go.
So you basically kind of oversee and make sure everybody's kind of like set up and doing the right thing and making sure everything's met.
Yeah, although a lot of that is it's more game specific, and in that case, it's usually whatever the producer is on that game is more concerned about the specific. Have you implemented the unit movement today or whatever? That's more of a game specific thing.
As a development manager, like, where do you see the future of Shenandoah Studios going to? Since you're one of the big voices in Shenandoah Studios.
Well, ideally, we'd like to be selling lots of games and growing, and perhaps doing more games at once, diversifying a little bit, without reducing the quality of the games we do at the same time. We certainly don't want to grow crazy and start losing sight of what we're trying to do.
Do you feel getting bigger as a company would you kind of lose some of that vision and innovation?
I've seen that happen as companies grow. I mean, the market changes too, so it's our vision at the start may not be valid after 8 years or whatever, which is kind of what happened at one of my last jobs. But
white tablet games. You guys at Shenandoah Studios, your first title was Battle of the Bulge for the iPad. What made you decide to make a game for the iPad rather than the PC?
For me, I wouldn't have been interested in PC to the same degree, but that's my personal involvement. But it seemed to fit as a great business goal because it was a growing and largely untapped market. I think at that time, no one had really done a very, I don't know what the right term is, but maybe a very polished look at serious games. And we were able to bring that focus in terms of being a wide open market. It's also a very great platform to be playing on. It's big enough to see all your pieces. You're a lot more constrained, say, on an iPhone, which has sort of the same growth potential. But there's a lot of iPads out there, clearly. It meant that anyone you'd be playing against would likely already be on the same game network you would be, because Game Center is pretty ubiquitous. If you have an Apple ID, you're probably on Game Center. So that was one less point of friction that you didn't have to sign up to some new matchmaking service to find opponents. So just a lot of things were sort of falling into place that, yeah, this is the time to do iPad.
If someone was in college right now and they want to do your position, they want to be sitting in your seat, what kind of advice would you give them? What kind of recommendation?
I don't think to be a game developer you necessarily even have to study it. I have had mixed experience with interviewing people that had gone through game development programs. Some of them are really good. Some of them are, I think, perhaps too focused on technology and not other things that go into making a game in terms of like psychology of how the players can interact with it, being able to understand some of the art decisions. If you're going to be a developer, you obviously do need to know how to program and write reasonable code. But again, I'll come back to saying, well, make a game. It's you can do that on the side. It's not going to be maybe a Battle of the Bulge type of game, but anything at all where you have to sort of discover all the answers to the different questions that come up in game development.
Well, thank you, Bradley, for joining us. I really appreciate your insights and becoming a development manager and giving feedback to our upcoming audience. Thank you so much, bud. Okay, I'm here with Eric, who's the CEO of Shenandoah Studios. Welcome, Eric, and thanks for coming on.
Well, thank you. Yeah, hi. Yeah, my name is Eric Lee Smith, and I'm the founder and CEO of Shenandoah Studio. And we started the company about 3 years ago, me and 4 original founders. And we've got 2 games published so far and more in the works.
How did you come up in the gaming industry? Are you what's your history?
Well, when I was a teenager, I liked games a lot. I liked Masterpiece and Sorry, and then I discovered Risk, and I really got into Risk in a big way. And then one day, my brother got Gettysburg by Avalon Hill, and we started playing war games a lot. And then I discovered the Avalon Hill and SPI games in the early 70s, and I was in junior high at the time, or early high school, and I just never looked back. I became a hobbyist from the first moment I saw them. By the time I was 20, I owned over 200 board war games. And I put off going to college because I got a degree in photography. But before I did that, I did some junior college in Dallas, and where I grew up. And I then applied to real college, and I got accepted into 4 colleges, one of which was in New York City, which happened to be where SPI was. So I said, well, it's a great art school, and it's near my favorite game company. So I went off to art school in New York City, and immediately went in on Friday nights and volunteered as a playtester at SPI. And that's where many, many game designers got their start, being playtesters at Friday Night Playtesting at SPI. And I was no different. So I'd go in on Friday nights and playtest, there'd be 50 gamers there, and they'd be playtesting 15 games at a time, and it was a lot of fun. You got to work with the game designers that were your heroes, and it was really fun. And after about 6 months, I asked the director there whether or not there'd be a position, a minimum wage internship available. And he said, sure. So I got hired as a minimum wage intern there. And the coming summer, I got a chance to actually write a description of a game for publication. The way this worked was they had a magazine called Strategy and Tactics Magazine. In the back, there were descriptions of games, and the readership would vote. And if it got over 7, then we would publish it. And so these descriptions were written by game designers and by game developers and by various people. And Brad, my boss, said, "Hey, write one." So me being a Texan, I wrote up the Alamo, and by gosh, it got voted in. It was a 7, over a 7. So I remember going to Jim Dunnigan, the co-founder of the company, and saying, "Oh, I'm excited, the Alamo got voted in. Who's going to design this game, Jim?" And he goes, "Well, you wrote the description, right?" I said, "Yeah." "Well, you are." So I'm like, "Oh, okay." So at that point, I'd been doing some development work for Jim. I'd moved away from just being a gopher around the office to actually being an intern working on games. But that was the first game I designed start to finish, and it turned out very well. It's still in print today, and it got nominated for Best War Game of the Year right out of the gate. Didn't win, didn't deserve to win, but it's still a good game. I'm still proud of it. And after that, while I was in college, I continued my game design career at SPI and graduated with a degree in photography from Pratt Institute after 3 years and went straight into game design. Helped co-found a company called Victory Games. Me, John Butterfield, Mark Herman, and about another 6 or 8 people left en masse from SPI and went over and created the Victory Games division of the Avalon Hill Game Company and designed a bunch of games there. And eventually I wanted to get into microcomputing in a desperate way, and there was just no gateway available to us to do that. So eventually I resigned in 1987 and went out and became a computer consultant in the burgeoning field of microcomputers, and self-taught, and started designing software, got some interesting consulting gigs, and in the long run moved to Philadelphia to join a startup here, which was a game company for about 4 months. It was a game company for 2 years, and I joined it. About 4 months later, it changed from a game company to actually being a software development company selling business to business. It had been doing business games, and they instead changed to doing business software. So for the next 20 years or plus, I was at that company and others that I helped either found or joined when they were very small. I spent 25 years designing software, most of it financial service software. But I designed it the way a game designer designs software. It was a big skill of mine to think like a game designer, and having had an art background, to know how to lay out a design. So it was very in demand. So it was a very good career for me. And then one weekend, the iPad came out. And I decided this is the device that will allow the kind of games that I love to be, published, where you don't have to worry so much about scrolling and zooming. You can just play. It's fast. It's colorful. It's lightweight. It's like a dream. So I literally took my software development and financial services career, set it aside, and started this company. That's the short version of my life.
Wow. When did you start up Shenandoah Studios?
Well, we wrote a check for space on September 3rd, 2010. That's when Jeff and I, the first co-founder, actually got some space, and we started signing up game titles for licensing, and we started working on our business plan and that kind of thing. We actually incorporated in April of 2011. The other two partners came on in the fall of 2011, and we finished raising some money in the late fall of 2011, hired our first two developers, and during 2012, we went into development. So it was a process to get the company up off the ground. It was essentially a two-stage process. There was just Jeff and I, and then there was the founders, 3 stages, and then there was the founders plus the development arm to take what we had designed, which was Battle of the Bulge, and put it in code.
Your first game, Battle of the Bulge, how did that come about? How did you guys think of that game?
Well, it's on our radar very early. I'm very good friends with John Butterfield, the games designer. And he had designed it as an iPhone game early on, like when the iPhone had recently come out. And it was kind of sitting around. He hadn't done anything with it. And I went over and I played it with him. And I really liked it. I thought it had real potential as an iPad game, not an iPhone game, an iPad game. And John's a great designer. It's a fairly simple game. It's sophisticated, but it's not difficult to play. And he's a professional. He knows how to develop games. So we decided to go with that as our first game. We had other games in our series, and we did we'd signed licenses for, including my Gettysburg game and others. But we decided this one was small enough, and it was a famous battle. It would exercise our development, team a good deal, but that it was compact enough to ship, within a 7-month period. So that's what we went with.
What kind of challenges did you face developing that game?
Oh, lots of challenges. Software is not easy. Well, one thing that we do is we prototype our games on paper, and this is a key to what we do. Like this is Gettysburg prototype here. There's the actual charts for Gettysburg. One more in the back. This is actually just a rule summary. So this is the actual combat system and terrain system for Gettysburg. This is a summary of the rules. And the rules are around 30 pages. So we design on paper, and we play on paper till the game works, so we know it's fun. Because making changes on paper is fast and inexpensive. Making changes in code is slow and expensive. So we took our Battle of Bulge game, made prototypes, got playtesters involved, and it was playtested many, many, many times before one line of code was written. And we had a full manuscript of the rules and the charts and tables, and ultimately those are published in the game. You can actually go look at them.
Coming from Battle of the Bulge, you went to Drive on Moscow, and now LL Main's coming out.
Well, actually, we went to LL Main after Bulge, and And we got LLMane running fairly quickly after Bulge. Within 6 weeks or 8 weeks after Bulge launched, we had LLMane running. The problem with LLMane was LLMane is a smaller battle, and it's the desert, and it has aspects of both lightning rapid movement and World War I trench warfare. And we realized fairly quickly that the Battle of the Bulge system was going to need quite a bit of work, change, to make LLMane a fun game. We could have continued on and released it, and it might have done okay financially, but it wouldn't have been up to our standards as a game. So we stepped back and we said, okay, what are some other titles that we have that we think would be more along the lines of Bulge? And we chose Drive on Moscow. It's similar in some ways, it's bigger. Has more units, bigger map. It has a very different feel in a lot of ways. But nonetheless, it's a division level World War II battle game where there's a surprise attack at the beginning and there's a lot of movement. Ultimately, the movement stalls out and there's a counterattack at the end. It's very tense. It has this special weather rules in the game that make it very unusual. There's 4 types of weather. There's clear, mud, frost, and snow, and they have effects. And so it's a more detailed game than Bulge, but if you can play Bulge, Drive on Moscow is about the same level of complexity. Personally, I prefer it as a game. I think it's a great war game, one of the best ever. Oh, I should mention it's by Ted Rasier, who is one of the great board war game designers, in my humble opinion.
In terms of cost, how much capital, how much funding is needed to make it indie game like Battle of the Bulge or Drive on Moscow?
Well, it depends on how you go about doing it. You can decide you're going to publish a game, and that's one way to do it. We didn't do that. What we did was we decided we're going to create a company, that is a studio, not one game, not 2 games. We have 17 games under title. So that's very different. There you need more capital. You're more serious. The easiest way to actually create a game is to create a design on paper, do a turn-based game, get it working, make sure it's fun, play test it with your friends, write the rules, actually get it done, and then work with a series of freelancers to execute the design. And there'll be sound, graphics people, and maybe some others, writers, if you're going to translate into other languages, you have some people up with translation. But that's a classic indie mode, which is to just sort of bootstrap along and spend as little money as possible. And most of those games, there's a lot of them on the App Store. Some of them are good, most of them are not. But that's a classic way to do it. What we did was more of an entrepreneurial approach where you raise money in order to start a company, and you actually pay salaries, and you invest in an office like this, and you invest in equipment, and you have a multi-year business plan in place, and it's just a business, just like any other business. So the amount of money to do that varies. I can recommend a book for those of you that care about this called The Lean Startup. We're doing the Lean Startup process, which means you raise just enough money to prove your business models as you go. So the first thing we had to prove was, can we actually make a game in a time frame that's reasonable, and will it be good? So you raised enough money to do that. It's a couple $100,000. And it worked. And then you raise another raft of money to say, okay, now we're going to go and do a second game, and we're going to create a game engine out of that. And you do that. And then you raise some more money to say, now we're going to launch 2 teams. So our company has 2 development teams. So it's a step-by-step as you prove your way along that you can do what you say you're doing. And we're still early on. I mean, we've got 2 games out. We've got LLMane that's very close to shipping, and we've got the Gettysburg game that's playable now and actually is moving along very nicely. And we have other games that we're eager to get to. So there's no magic formula. People do it different ways. Bootstrapping is certainly one way to do it. And the critical things are, you've got to, prove your milestones as you go, so you know what you're doing.
Gettysburg is going to, you were mentioning before, Gettysburg is going to be your largest game.
Yeah, it's the largest battle of the American Civil War. And we're going to do other Civil War battles as well. But this is the largest one. So if you can make Gettysburg work, you can make any Civil War game work. It's to put that in scale. It's the battlefield is about, depending on how I count it, it's about 3 miles across and 4 miles long, and it had 140,000 soldiers fighting there, which is how many we had in Iraq. So it's this giant amount of people in a very small space, and by far the most bloody 3 days in American military history. It's a great game situation because it's a meeting engagement. There's not very few pieces on the map. You can get started very, very fast. We're going to have quite a few scenarios. We'll add more scenarios as we go. I think we're going to ship with 3 or 4. Some of them are small, some of them are big. It'll have the campaign. Campaign will take a while. But it's fun in that in a given turn, you're only moving around 5 to 7 pieces. So I move my 5 to 7 pieces of my division. You move 5 to 7 pieces of your division. We alternate. So it's not as if you're spending an hour moving 35 pieces on your side at once. So it's not the I go, you go sequence of play style. It's the chip pick system, which came out of my original Across 5 Aprils game, which this game is somewhat derived from, although this is really quite a different game. Combat system's totally different. But it does use the incremental movement phase system of Across 5 Aprils in it.
Your games, Battle of the Bulge, Drive of Moscow, I'm sure these 2 games I've been playing are very easy to learn. You can dive right into Battle of the Bulge, and within literally 3 minutes you can start playing, or less than that. Is that something that you took and you intentionally did to make it very intuitive to the player, or?
Interesting question. We actually underestimated how difficult it was going to be. We got fairly far into Bulge. We were about 3 months away from launch. And we started doing blind tests where people hadn't been playing the game before. And we started seeing people having really some difficulty understanding what to do. So my partner Nick Karp intervened at that point, and we put together, we were always going to have a tutorial, but instead we added to it a thing called a quick start, which is quick start pages. And we changed the tutorial approach a little bit to make it even more explanatory. And we put in little pop-up text boxes that when you touch the screen, a text box pops up. And so we talk to the user about what they're supposed to do next. And we really spent a lot of attention on trying to make the game easy. But so it turned out to be easy, but there's a lot of work into making it easy. A lot of design work too.
Another question I have is a lot of game developers are still making desktop games.
Mm-hmm.
We see iPad coming out as a very big mass with a big mass audience. A lot of people purchasing them and doing all their day-to-day work on the iPad. Why did you choose the iPad? How did you see this?
Yeah, it was basically a gamble that the iPad would end up being a game system, game technology. Because at the time when we started the company, that was not really a proven fact at all. It turned out to be correct. It's one of the largest, if not the largest, platforms in the world already. It's not the only one. People love PC games, and we are going to address that in the future. We are going to have our games on other platforms. Gettysburg will probably be the first game we do that with, and we're not ready to announce exactly what we're going to do, but we are making architecture changes to the code to make it easier for us to get onto Windows and get onto Android and get onto other platforms. But for us, iOS is a central, and it's really not so much iOS as it is the touch-based interface is what changes everything. Because when you have a big map like Gettysburg, it's all about zooming and scrolling, and you just get tired of moving the dang mouse, So what you do is you just go boop, 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 boop. It's just wonderful. So we think it's really important, and over time it's just going to get bigger and bigger. It is a kind of golden age for indie game design developing right now, and it's a little bit of the wild wild west, and so it's very exciting. We're out there pretty early with war games. There's not a lot of war games out yet. There will be over time, and quality will rise, and we're very excited. We don't consider game companies like Hunted Cow and others, Slitherine, competition. We consider them peers. We consider ourselves an entertainment company, and there's always a place for more than one movie, just like there's always a place for more than one game. So we're excited by the quality of our compadres who are making games, and the fact that the quality is rising across the industry on iPad and iOS in general.
Do you foresee a time where majority of the games are going to be playing on iPad, or are you seeing a time where it's going to be more 50-50? Where do you see the future?
iPad versus PC, or
iPad versus desktop computing or laptop?
Well, I think the time in which revenue goes over to iOS will happen fairly soon. I don't know exactly when that'll occur, but I think that the iOS platform will be bigger than all the rest of them combined. It'll take time. I just don't see how it can't happen. That said, I believe that the game companies that are doing PC-based software are also evolving, and they're making smaller studios, and they're making games that don't take millions of dollars of investment to get a single title out. So you're seeing synergies between the way iOS games are designed and developed, along with the best practices of the bigger studios. So it's just going to be change, and no one really knows. And if somebody tells you they know, don't believe them, because nobody really knows. There's too much change going on right now for anybody to really actually know.
You developed Battle of the Bulge and all the rest of your titles on the iOS platform for the Apple. Why did you decide to go with Apple's iOS ecosystem versus other competitors like Windows Phone or Android?
Well, there's a couple of reasons. One is, as an entrepreneur, one of your biggest challenges is to focus. There's this classic adage: when you start a company, start one company, not two. Like, don't start a board game company and a computer software company at the same time. Don't start an Android company and an iOS company at the same time. It was a very simple decision. iOS was a market leader by far at the time; they still are, and Android on the tablet was essentially nowhere. So that's Kindle Fire and others are moving along nicely, and you can look up the statistics. It's a rising tide there. I think in 2014 more and more games will be released in both. But before 2014, you couldn't really make a very strong business case to be on Android. So it's just that simple, really.
Do you have any advice or any recommendations for the people that are coming in as new developers?
Well, it depends on how you mean developer. Being a board game person, a developer means somebody that takes a game and works with the rules and all that, and is really what's called a producer in the software world. So if you take the developer role being the programmer role, so you have programmers and you have producer developers. Those are very good positions to get into. The easiest way to get into the industry is starting QA, is by volunteering to be a playtester for some of the studios out there. And if you do a good job and you're very conscientious about it, that's the best gateway. That's the way I got in the business. John Butterfield, Mark Herman. Basically, I know, Bruce Shelley. Everybody I know that's a game designer started in QA, started as a playtester. That's the best way, because you get to work with professionals and see what they do. And if you take it seriously and you give good results and you write good reports and you're consistent and you follow through, you will get a break and you will get an opportunity to actually work and get paid. Now, there's other ways to get into it. You can go to a program like Drexel and go through their game program there, game design program, and get hired as a junior developer at a shop. That's another gateway in. Most people do it just sort of because they're passionate about it. And one way or another, they figure it out. They self-publish, or they do what I did, and again, go and become a gopher at a game company and do whatever it takes to hang out with Richard Berg and Redmond Simonson and the people I got to hang out with at SPI.
Thank you so much, Eric, for joining us. I
My
appreciate
pleasure.
your time.